Paint a heart with me in watercolors. I have the drawing here. I like to trace the drawing onto my watercolor paper so I'm not handling the paper much or damaging it by erasing and just scratching and having my fingers on it. So here the drawing is on there. I like to start with wet on wet backgrounds. I start very loose. So I'm doing clean water on my drawing, and then I'm just going to start adding color. Did a yellow underwash, and while it's wet, I'm going to drop more colors into it. I like the mixture of starting loose and then working my way to more details. So I'm laying in some of the colors of the body of the heart, the main part of the heart. With watercolors, I am traditional about my highlights. I like to leave the whites or light colors, paint around them, so that's where I'm leaving a little highlight part there for the heart. And now I'm putting in some loose background colors for roses surrounding the heart. At the beginning of a painting, I'm kind of figuring out what I'm going to do with the painting. I don't have it all strictly planned out. Like, what is my color scheme? I knew I wanted to do reds, pinks, yellows. I wasn't sure if I was going to bring in blue, but at this point I decided yes, I'm going to bring in blue because I want to have the blue for the is that the arteries or the veins? I'm not sure which one for the heart. The anatomical heart, I wanted to use that blue. Plus, blue is present in the color scheme that I wanted because it is present in purple, which is, red plus blue. So I'm bringing in the blue for the leaves of the roses, kind of give a little idea, leaning towards green, although I'm not bringing in any green, but blue glazed over yellow is kind of a greenish color. So here around the heart has dried enough that I can start some dry brushing, not wet on wet anymore. I can start laying in more of the detailed area. I think I'm going to call those arteries. I'm sorry if it's completely wrong. It's been a long time since I have studied any kind of anatomy, but I'm painting them blue. And I'm painting around my highlights, and then I go back, I clean my brush and go back with clean water on my brush, a damp brush, to soften those highlights. You can also paint it in there, the whole area, and then lift your highlights with a damp brush. It just doesn't always lift as well or as precisely as painting around and softening, but I do lift it later. I'll show you that. I just touched my painting with the back of my hand to see if it was dry in that area. This is a small painting. I think it was 5x7. So I'm able to lay my hand on the outside of the painting. You don't want to lay your hand down on the area that you're going to be painting because your hand has oils on it, like natural oils, and that will make the paint not behave the same in those areas. It will not take the paint. So you want to avoid that. So if you have to touch it to see if it's dry, touch with the back of your hand. Here I'm doing, one of my favorite techniques is negative technique. I feel like it's very dreamy. I like starting with a loose background and then tightening it up. I'm laying in purple for the background color and painting around the roses and leaves that I had drawn out and had done the light colors on with the wet on wet layer. Negative technique kind of blew my mind. It was hard to wrap my mind around it when I first started doing watercolors, but now I use that technique in most of my other media that I paint with. So the watercolors have influenced my other styles. You don't want, or I don't want, a hard line happening in my background. I want it all to go together smoothly. So I'm using this really intense wash of purple and I'm trying to do it without leaving hard lines. So I'm being strategic where I'm painting, like painting up to stems and stopping in areas that are narrow, so there's not a big area that's going to dry and get a hard line. Rotating it so I can get to the places where I'm trying to paint. Oh, I might have gotten out of the camera too much. Sorry about that. I didn't catch that. This time I'm laying my hand down on some paper, just to keep me from getting oils on it. I tend to do that in larger paintings. You just have to make sure it's dry underneath where the paper's going to lay. But that's also to help shield the painting from getting my oils on it. You do a lot of glazes with watercolors. I use intense colors, like in a couple of washes anyhow. Like I'm using an intense purple at this point, which means using less water, more paint pigment. But even then, I'm going to end up doing quite a few glazes. So you don't want to mess up the paper with your oils on your hands. So I'm still working on the background. And by this point, I have my colors chosen for the painting, and I don't want to bring in any more colors. If you bring in, I try to limit my colors, 4 or 5 colors, especially for a small painting like this. I can bring in more colors if it's a large painting, but the cohesion of the piece is really helped when you have a limited color palette. You can do a lot with 4 or 5 colors by washing over and mixing them together, come up with a lot of the colors you need. But if you're using from that limited color palette, you're gonna just have a better, more cohesive feel to the painting. So I'm finishing up my negative technique over here. I don't like to use a blow dryer. It annoys me to have to sit there and dry paint. So I always try to find a section that's dry enough for the next step. So while the background dries, I think I flip my painting around and I'm going to start on a section that is dry. So I don't have to wait on paint to dry before working, and I don't have to stop and use the blow dryer. So I'm going to lay in. I'm going to call these the veins. Sorry if I've got it switched and it's really arteries. Laying in a red. I know I'm not using a true red here. I'm using more of a pink red. I can't remember the name that I was using, but I use Grumbacher watercolors in general. I like them. It's a good medium grade watercolor that's available at Hobby Lobby, so I like them. So I'm laying in some red, more intense red for the veins. And right there, I was next to a section of the background that has not dried yet, so I needed to move on, because if you bring paint up next to some wet paint, it will catch and flow, and I didn't want that. I didn't want catching and flowing. Oh, and I think I just painted that one the wrong color. I'll have to go back and erase it in a little bit. Now I'm laying in more of the red color for the body of the heart. Painting around where some of the main vessels come onto the heart, because I don't want to influence their color with the red too much. Painting around my highlights, and then I'm taking a brush that is with clean water on it and softening the edges of that red. There's like some sort of fatty something on the heart, so it's kind of a yellowish color. Here I am doing a few extra red places on my roses. I want to keep my flowers very loose. I don't want to get lost in the details of the roses, because this is just a 5x7 that I didn't want to spend many hours on. So I'm kind of doing it in a stencil sort of look, stencil technique, where you're leaving the lighter color and just filling in some of the darker color. Again, I'm keeping my hand off to the side. This painting is representative of having good boundaries. It is a heart with appropriate boundaries being illustrated. It's called To Win My Heart. And so I wanted it to kind of be a maze of roses leading to the heart, where a person would have to work to get to the trusting time of being in somebody's heart, but it's not impossible. You know, it's just appropriate level of gaining trust, going through the maze, going through the roses. And I like roses when thinking about representing boundaries because they're beautiful, but they have thorns, you know, so they do have their own built-in boundaries. Okay, here I'm filling in some more of the blue. And now I am shading the fatty substance. It's the yellow background, so I'm bringing in some light washes of purple to shade. Yellow and purple are across from each other on the color wheel. They're complementary colors. They shade each other well. And I'm bringing in the same purple to shade my heart just for cohesiveness. I'm not going to bring in any black in this painting. My darkest color will be the dark purple, which reads very much like black if you need it to. So I'm using a soft layer of shading here to bring in some dimension to the anatomical heart. And I'm bringing in a little bit of detail on the leaves, just a little center vein for all of them. Again, I did not want to dive into the details too much for such a small piece. This painting is made specifically to go into the Alabama Women's Caucus of Art, a collection that is coming up called the See Me that's a different exhibit. This one is the Call and Response, where the Alabama women who are chosen to participate do small pieces of art, and the images of our art are sent to a North Carolina caucus of women, and they are going to do pieces in response to our pieces. And then they're all going to hang together, first in Alabama and then in North Carolina. So I don't typically choose to paint small. I have a large personality and I like to make large art. Making a 5x7 was a little bit annoying to me. So I put it off, and finally I just needed to get it done. But I did enjoy it, probably because it was a one-of and I wasn't going to be doing a lot of small pieces. So it will probably be one of the smallest pieces I'll have available when this piece ends up being in one of my solo shows. I have a solo show planned at the end of this year, and then 2 in 2024. Here I'm putting in the blood vessels with intense red and a small round brush. It's good to pull your brush, and when you're doing more details, you're not bearing down as hard on the brush. You lay your hand down, you touch and pull. You don't want to push. Pushing brushes doesn't work well, and for details you want a light hand. You're not bearing down hard. And then I'm putting in some shadows. I went ahead and signed with my brush. It's almost done. This is called To Win My Heart, and I came up with the title. It came to me while I was painting it.